science enthusiasts. My name is Jason Zakowski. I'm a high school chemistry teacher and a science communicator, but I'm also the dog dad of Bunsen and Beaker, the science dogs on social media. If you love science and you love pets, you've come to the right place. Put on your lab coat, put on your safety glasses, and hold on to your tail. This is the Science Pawdcast. Hi everybody, welcome back to the Science Pawdcast. We hope you're happy and healthy out there. This is the last podcast episode of 2022, and Chris and I are looking forward to spending some time over the holidays, relaxing and recharging. The podcast will be back in February of 2023. We always take about a month and a half off, and the main reason is to book guests for the start of the year. Okay, well, what's on the show this week? In science news, we're going to take a look at a recent study that has some bad news about smartphones, tablets, and kids. In pet science, we're going to look at a new study that found the origin of cats. And our guest in Ask an Expert is Dr. Ivis Gore, who's a radiochemist. It's a really fascinating discussion. Put on your thinking caps, though. Hey, dogs, did you know that grizzly bears aren't harmed by microwave radiation? Yeah, it turns out they're among several species of non-polar bears. Okay, that one's bad. All right, on with the show, because there's no time like science time. This week in science news, let's take a look at tablets and kids. So Chris and I have two sons, and they're both older now. Adam is our youngest, and Duncan is our oldest. Duncan's graduated and moved away from home, and Adam is in grade 12, and sad to say he will be moving away soon for school. And my siblings, I have two sisters and a brother, and they all have little kids. They do. And it's, we had our family supper at my dad's place, and it was really fun. And I just got to thinking that what there is for kids today is so vastly different than what we had with our boys when they were so little. So this study caught my eye. It was basically taking a look at how tablets and smartphones could affect kids in a way that parents may not be thinking about. This study comes from JAMA Pediatrics by Michigan Medicine. So they were looking at how smartphones and tablets could be or are used to calm kids when they're upset. And the age range they were looking at was between 3 and 5. What they found was not necessarily the greatest news ever. So the study included 422 parents and 422 kids, and it looked at the parent and caregiver responses to how often they used the devices as a calming tool. And then they associated the use of the smartphone or tablet as a calming device to symptoms of emotional reactivity or dysregulation over a long period of time. It was 6 months. Now, if you've heard dysregulation before, and I haven't, I wasn't really sure what it meant. So I just Googled it. It includes rapid shifts between being really sad and really happy, and a sudden change in mood and feelings and being impulsive. So kind of like your every average toddler when they're having a bad day, a tired toddler. Now, what they found that was particularly alarming was that the parents that used the smartphone as a tool to calm their child saw the highest correlation to emotional consequences for using the smartphone as a way to calm their child. It was particularly noticeable in boys, and particularly noticeable within boys who were already prone to hyperactivity and impulsiveness. So the conclusion of the study was it's just not great to give your upset kid a smartphone or a tablet. There were alternative ways that you could soothe the child and help build up that emotional regulation. And some of the other parents that had a lot of success in the study, it was mentioned that they used things like sensory techniques. So not the smartphone as a way of sensory, but such as hugging or pressure, jumping up and down, giving the kids squishy putty, like something to get their mind off whatever they're upset about, and squishing putty with their hands, looking at a book or reading a book. Some parents had this thing called a sparkle jar. And I looked it up, and it's a jar with like sprinkles and sparkles that kids would shake and move around. and listening to music. Other techniques that parents had more success with was saying, you can feel that. This is what you're feeling. So let's try to do this to help the way that you're feeling. And the techniques mentioned seemed to do a little bit better. There was less of reporting of dysregulation. One thing to mention, though, is a lot of parents will say, but when I give my kid a smartphone or tablet, it calms them down. And that was noted in the study. The use of mobile devices to settle kids who are in dysregulation temporarily had the effect of calm. There seems to be long-term consequences if that's the go-to soothing strategy. And that was the quote from lead author Jeremy Radinsky, who's a medical doctor. If you're a parent of a small child who's listening to the Science Podcast, you can't blame yourself if your kid's having a freak out and the only tool that you have to just get them through that moment, like you're in the middle of a supermarket and you have to get bananas or something, you may have to use the phone. It does work. I've seen my siblings use it before. But in the long term, probably some other techniques are better. I would think about, I'm thinking about getting a sparkle jar. That's science news for this week. This week in Pet Science, we're going to look at a study from the University of Missouri that pinpointed perhaps where the first domesticated cats came from. And the conclusion is it's from an area of the world called the Fertile Crescent. I had no idea where the Fertile Crescent is, so I went and did my own research. And apparently, it's a fairly large place in the world. I'm sorry, I in high school and in school did not care for geography. I was like, I don't need to memorize this. I can always look it up. And here it comes back to bite me in the butt. So what I found, and maybe a lot of people are going to be like, I can't believe you didn't know that, is the Fertile Crescent is in the Middle East. And it includes places like modern day Iraq, Syria, Palestine, Lebanon, and Jordan. And the reason why it's called the Fertile Crescent is that's where the fertile soil and agricultural resources were at one point and still today. And also it's named a crescent because of its crescent-shaped geography, which goes from the Mediterranean to the Persian Gulf. There's a whole schwack of important rivers that run through there, and my research came up with rivers called the Tigris and the Euphrates. Okay, I probably said that wrong. It's where the earliest known civilizations, including the Babylonians, probably developed in that region. Okay, so back to cats. The study collected and analyzed a whole bunch of DNA from cats around the Fertile Crescent area, as well as through other places in the world like Africa, Asia, and Europe, and then compared it to 200 different genetic markers. So one of the DNA markers studied was called microsatellites. And these are DNA markers that mutate quickly, and they would give the researchers clues about recent cat populations and how breeds developed over the last 100 years. Another DNA marker they looked at was something called nucleotide polymorphisms, which are single changes that would occur throughout the genome. And that gives the researchers clues about what was going on thousands of years ago. So we have some modern markers and we have some ancient markers. So what the study found using very complicated DNA techniques is that the first domesticated cats were in this area of the world and then migrated with humans to other parts of the world. The study found that while cats from different regions have some genetic difference, they do not form distinct clusters and are largely the same genetically. So that's really interesting that the cats that were that they looked at the DNA from Asia and from Europe all come back to the single genetic marker of the cats of the Fertile Crescent. As people of the Fertile Crescent spread out, migrating around the world, cats went with them. When I was on History Erased, that was a really fun story I got to memorize and then talk about for that TV show. Cats were pretty valuable to migrating humans, both on land and on boat, because they ate vermin. that would potentially eat all of the food or destroy crops. So cats were kind of valuable. I mean, now it's not great to let cats out because they murder all the birds. Yes, they'll catch mice, but they'll also kill all the birds. But of course, those humans that were moving about were way more concerned with their supper not getting eaten by mice, and then having cats around as a bit of a helper. Cats are considered semi-domesticated because of this reason. Even still to this day, they still hunt and they will survive because they still have those instincts and natural behaviors from thousands of years ago. That's Pet Science for this week. Hey everybody, before we get to the interview section, here's a couple ways you can help the Science Podcast out. Number one, if you're on any place that rates podcasts, give us a great rating. Tell your friends and share it with people who love science and pets, like teachers. Number two, think about signing up as a member of the Paw Pack. It allows you to connect with people who love our show, and it's a way to keep the show free. Number three, check out our merch store. We have the Bunsen Stuffy 2.0. There's still some Beaker stuffies left. They're adorable as well. Warm, cuddly clothes, and adorable drinkware. The link is in the show notes. Okay, back to the interviews. It's time for Ask an Expert on the Science Podcast, and I have Dr. Ivis Gore, who is a radiochemist and assistant professor. Ivis, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. I'm very excited to be on the podcast.
Oh, well, I'm excited to talk to you. Where are you in the world? Where are you calling into the show from?
I'm in Knoxville, Tennessee.
Oh, okay, Tennessee. Have you lived in Tennessee your whole life? Or are you there for work / you later on stuff?
I have been here for a whopping 3 months.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I had visited East Tennessee in the past, and I've always really liked it. It's very, very green with the Smoky Mountains and all of that. And I just recently moved from New Mexico. I was doing a postdoc at Los Alamos National Lab. So very, very different terrain.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Desert to foresty.
Yes.
And mountainous. Well, yeah. New Mexico has some kind of some things, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I'm just trying to remember the geography. I'm from Alberta, Canada, so we're a ways away from wherever you are.
Yeah.
So I introduced you as a radiochemist, and Dr. Gore, what's your training in science?
So I have a bachelor's in chemistry. My doctorate degree, the diploma says biomedical sciences. That's the program that I was in. But my research training is focused on radiochemistry. I was very fortunate to be in the lab of Dr. Suzanne Lappy, who is the director of the cyclotron facility at the University of Alabama at Birmingham.
Cool.
And what that means is I had direct access to production of all of the cool radioisotopes, some that are sold as part of the DOE isotope program, and some that we just got to play with to see if we could make. And so because of that, I got to play a little bit with radioisotope production on the cyclotron, and then I got to work on developing radiopharmaceuticals.
And when you were young, were you interested in this type of science? Like when you were a little, where you're like, I think I'm going to be making some radioactive stuff a little later in life.
No, I was pre-med my entire life.
Oh, okay.
I was certain that I was going to be a doctor, an MD. I am a doctor, but I thought I was going to be a physician. And I think it was my last semester in college, I decided that was not my calling. And I was very fortunate to make that call because I have a huge phobia of blood and needles.
Oh, okay.
And, if I had gone to medical school, I would have failed miserably. But my mom always had this big aspiration that I was going to be the MD of the family. And that when I told her I wasn't applying to medical school, I was going to apply to graduate school, she cried.
Oh, no.
And I think it was because she didn't really understand what this job entails. I think she's very proud of me now, but at the time, I think she thought that I was making a really big career mistake. So yeah, I was MD my whole life. I was in college. I was in a medical fraternity. And so all of our fraternity events, and it was a fraternity because it was co-ed. All of the events were medical related, talking about medicine, talking about MCATs, all that stuff. And then my senior chemistry course, I don't even remember the name of it at this point. I had a really great professor, and she said I was really talented, and if I had considered applying to graduate school. And I was like, no, what does that mean? What would I be? She's like, well, you'd be a scientist. I was like, what? What do scientists do? And so I looked into it, and I was like, yeah, this sounds great. I'll do that. And here we are.
You're not the first scientist that I've talked to that was pre-med, and then like they realized, they're like, I can't deal with people and blood and guts and all that. That's not an uncommon origin story for amazing scientists like yourself.
Oh, well, thank you. And yeah, I mean, most medical trajectory people in academia have a bachelor's in some kind of science. I think there are very few people that go to medical school that don't have a STEM degree. I do know some people that have like a bachelor's in music or a bachelor's in something else. And I think those people make it very far because they're extremely talented. But I don't think it's uncommon for someone who is pre-med to branch off then into a science career that's not medicine, because we all have either bachelor's in chemistry or biology or physics or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Now you mentioned some terms. I wonder if you could break some of it down for us, for our audience, before we get into some of the questions I have. Okay. When you were dealing with a cyclotron, you mentioned a term that you got to play with these chemicals. Could you just tell everybody a little bit about what those chemicals are, just for people that maybe aren't familiar?
Yeah, sure. So if we think of the periodic table, there are elements along that periodic table that we're pretty familiar with, hydrogen, carbon, titanium, scandium. But there's actually what is called the chart of the nuclides, which is an extended form of this periodic table. And it shows us all of the isotopes that are available. So when we think of, say, hydrogen or carbon, we think of one element or one isotope of hydrogen or carbon, but there are actually multiple isotopes of most elements. And so what makes up, what we think of for an isotope is essentially how many protons and neutrons they have, right? So if we have something like carbon, it has the same number of protons and neutrons, the normal carbon that we think of, and it has the isotopic number 12. It has 6 protons and 6 neutrons. But carbon can also have other isotopes, meaning carbon can also have a variation, if you will, in its atomic nucleus of plus or minus either protons or neutrons. So we can think of carbon-14, and carbon-14 has excess neutrons in its nucleus. It still has 6 protons because protons are essentially what define an element as being that element. But when it has plus or minus excess or less neutrons, it's now a different isotope of itself. So we can think of carbon-14. It has 8 neutrons and 6 protons. And so now carbon-14 is a radioisotope of carbon. And so carbon-14, as many people know, or maybe they don't know, and we're going to talk about it, is something that we can use for what's known as carbon dating, which is where you can tell the age of something by the amount of carbon-14 in a body, in rocks, in the ground. And so that's a little bit about radioisotopes. But at the cyclotron facility, we could produce synthetic radioisotopes.
Oh, cool. So like stuff that's not found in nature, like carbon-14 in some random rock, you could just make the thing.
And most, so the reason that we have radioisotopes in nature, like carbon-14 or potassium-40, is because of events that happened in the galaxy. And so, or like nuclear weapons detonations that increased the amount of carbon-14 in the world. But there are radioisotopes that are naturally abundant in the earth that are due to, and I don't want to mess this up, but what I'm thinking is, like the Big Bang. The Big Bang happened, or normal stardust also is the result, or radioisotopes are the result of things of that nature happening in the galaxy. And that's not really my area of expertise, so I don't want to completely butcher it. But there are radioisotopes that are available in nature, they're present in nature. And so, but there are radioisotopes that we can produce synthetically on something like a cyclotron or a nuclear reactor. And so at UAB's cyclotron facility, we could accelerate protons on this machine. And so if we had a target material, think of a quarter made of, my specific project was focused on producing titanium-45.
So like a little titanium quarter.
Well, so my project was my project was focused on producing titanium-45. And so to do that, we would use a little quarter, if you will, of scandium.
Oh, and you'd hit protons into it, and it would turn into a different element.
Yes, exactly.
You're an alchemist.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And so we'd hit the scandium with protons. The proton hits the nucleus of the scandium. And so now we have excess protons. That nucleus is unstable. And now it's, because we added a proton to that nucleus, it's no longer scandium. Now it's titanium because it has one more proton. Yeah.
You're a wizard. Like that obviously you know so much more about this than me, but the first time somebody told that to you, were you like, what? That is pretty cool.
I don't think I thought of it too much.
Oh, really? I'm just like, like I know the chemistry that if you add a proton, you turn it into the next element in the line.
Yeah.
It's wild to me that you can just chuck some protons at a thing and now it's something new. Like that's pretty cool.
Yeah. And the first, I think it was the first, if I'm not misremembering, the first or one of the first cyclotrons that were ever invented was this tiny little desktop cyclotron.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. And so the one at UAB was obviously not tiny. It was I think half the basement of the hospital.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
Not the whole cyclotron itself. It was still pretty big. I think it was probably my height in diameter, so about 5 feet radius, I would say. But yeah, you use hydrogen gas, and so you produce essentially like protons that you
from
can
hydrogen,
accelerate at really, really, really high energies. Energy is high enough to basically stick this proton into the nucleus of this atom.
I love it.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for explaining that.
Yeah, I hope I hope I didn't completely butcher the whole thing. It's always funny because you study this and you kind of understand it, but when you're explaining it, you're like, am I doing this right?
No, that's great. So that's a great framework for the questions that will follow.
Okay.
So one of the things like you study is this PET stuff, positron emission tomography.
Yeah.
What is PET? How is it related? What does it do?
So PET is an imaging modality, right?
Okay.
So if you've ever broken a bone, you go in and you get an X-ray, probably. Yep. So that's an imaging modality. X-rays are really good, or CTs are really good at imaging hard tissue like bone in the body. We also have MRI. It's an imaging modality, and it's really good at imaging softer tissue. So if you ever think that you have something is wrong with your brain, you may go in and get an MRI.
Right. Okay.
And PET is a third imaging modality and my favorite.
Okay.
And it leverages nuclear characteristics of some radioisotopes. So certain radioisotopes, they have nuclear characteristics that lead to decay. And so radioisotopes we can consider, for the most part, they're unstable. They're unhappy. They don't want to be in that configuration. They want to be in the configuration of what the periodic table looks like. Those elements are stable and they're happy. And basically, it's the arrangement of protons and neutrons, that balance. Sometimes if you have excess protons or neutrons, that is what causes this instability in the atom. And so if you
it's got an unhappy haircut.
Yes, you have an unhappy haircut, you really want your hair to grow. Okay. Maybe not to fall out. And so let me read.
Oh, I'm so sorry I interrupted you.
No, it's okay.
I was just thinking like a stable atom has like a certain haircut, and the isotopes have like a weird haircut, and they just want to get back to their normal haircut.
Yeah, that's actually a really great point. But some of these isotopes, like titanium-45, are proton rich or neutron deficient. So they have excess protons. And generally, this isn't always the case, but generally, most isotopes that are proton rich, we can say, are unhappy. So they're going to decay in a form that's called positron emission. Okay. And a positron, we can think of, is basically the opposite of an electron. We've heard of electrons as these little tiny bubbles floating around the outside of the nucleus of an atom. And for all intents and purposes, a positron is the opposite of that. So it's a little tiny particle and it has a positive charge. So that's why it's a positron. And so when an isotope decays via positron emission, oftentimes we can harvest that, or we can leverage that that mode of emission and use it for imaging purposes. And so what happens is a positron is going to find an electron just in the environment. There's lots of electrons in the environment. But if there's a positron, when it finds, it's not if, it will find an electron, it's going to collide, and essentially it's going to annihilate. They're going to collide with each other, and this collision with each other is going to produce two 511 keV, and this is their energy, gamma rays. And through this production of always two 511 keV gamma rays, they're always in direct coincidence, and this is just physical properties that hold true. The detectors that are located around the bed, and now I'm talking about PET imaging itself. There are detectors located around the bed where we can say a patient is on the bed. They've been injected with this PET isotope. The positron finds an electron in the body, usually, of the patient. The detectors are going to read those 511 keV gamma rays that have now hit the detectors. And slightly off topic, but in relation, we now have what's called time of flight PET, and it makes for much more sensitive detection of these 511 keV gammas, right? Because we never have just one positron and one electron. We have many of these events occurring at the same time. So these detectors, they're not getting saturated, but they're getting, or if you have enough activity, they will get saturated. But they're being hit by a lot of 511 keV gamma rays. So once it goes through these detectors, it's going to go through scintillation detectors and produce photons. And then there's detectors that are going to pick up those light behind that. Then it's up to the software to reconfigure this image based on all of these events that have happened in the PET system. And my husband actually works or has worked in PET MRI. So if he's listening and I said something wrong, I'm really sorry. But so it's going to reconfigure this image. And so what it's going to do is it's going to say, we had this 511 keV gamma hit this detector, and we had this 511 keV gamma hit this detector. And if they hit in the direct line of collision, which is they have to be, I just forgot my words, in direct coincidence of each other. So it's called the line of coincidence. And they hit at the exact same time, it's going to register that as an event. So when it reconfigures the image, it's going to essentially kind of retrace where that annihilation came from, and it'll maybe like paint a voxel. And so it's going to do this the whole duration of the scan, and we're going to get this really cool image of the patient. And so that's kind of a quick and dirty way of explaining how PET works.
Oh my goodness. It's like wizardry. Oh my goodness.
It kind of is.
What is it used for? If I went into the hospital, could I say, I don't want an MRI, give me a PET? Like, is this relatively new? What is the application of this?
Well, the first PET radiopharmaceutical that was used, I believe, was iodine 131 for thyroid imaging. And this was, I should know the exact date, but I want to say 1930. 1940. So it's really, I think, in world history, it's relatively new. It's not even a century that this has been used in medical applications. And so you could ask for a PET scan, but it really depends on what you're going in for. So the most commonly used PET radioisotope for medical imaging is F18, which is fluorine-18, a radioisotope of fluorine that has really nice PET characteristics or nuclear characteristics. And by nice, I mean the energy of the positron that's emitted, the amount of positrons that are emitted. I believe F18 is a pure positron emitter, meaning all of its decay events, every time that atom decays or emits a particle, it's a positron. And there are not many like those. So that means that the images that are going to be produced are really, really nice. So F18 is commonly tagged to many usually amino acid derivatives, because that F18 can be used to what's called fluorinate something. So if there's a compound that already has a fluorine atom present, you can kind of replace it with the F18 atom. But F18 is most commonly used in what's called fluorodeoxyglucose. And it's called that because it's essentially a glucose molecule, and one of the alcohol groups has been replaced with F18. So you're basically injecting this spicy sugar into a person's body, and it's going to image any metabolic property that is occurring in the body, which is consuming excess glucose. So we can think of tumors.
Something that's gone haywire and using way too much energy.
Yeah, a lot of tumors actually I don't want to say most because that's not true, but a lot of tumors are very metabolically active. So F18 FDG is a really good radiopharmaceutical for imaging cancers. It's not going to tell you what kind of cancer it is, but it will tell you, hey, this lesion that we're seeing is metabolically active. It's also going to light up your brain, meaning your brain on that PET scan, if it's functioning, is going to be one black blob. And PET is not usually reconstructed in color. It's usually in grayscale. So the more radiopharmaceutical you have in an area, kind of the darker it's going to appear on the reconstructed image. So the brain is just going to be, it's like black.
Too much going on. Okay. Yeah. That is amazing. So folks that are listening, if they've heard of people getting a PET scan or they've heard, it's just amazing to break down the science of how that works. So thank you for that.
Oh yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying, I really love talking about what I do, and it's always fun because so many people are like, "Whoa, I had no idea," and I'm like, I love sharing this.
Ivis, could I ask about the actinides and lanthanides question?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So, Doc, you also study lanthanides and actinides and how to separate them. Now, we're in my jam, all of the stuff we're talking about, because I'm a chemist myself. I teach high school chemistry. I didn't go past my undergrad, so I am so impressed with people that go to graduate and then further. But for folks that are listening, why are you interested in these lanthanides and actinides, the bottom of the periodic table?
Yeah.
Why are they important to society to know about how to separate them?
Yeah, so for a long time, actinides and lanthanides were not really studied, and I think that still kind of holds true. We know about them, and I think individually we understand. I think we can say we can understand them pretty well individually. And there are a lot of radioactinides and radiolanthanide isotopes that are medically relevant. And there's this really cool area of research that is pretty much up and coming that's called theranostics. And if you're clever, you can probably come up with the fact that theranostics means the conjunction of diagnostics and therapy. And so we know that with PET, we're diagnosing. So PET is a diagnostic imaging modality. It's just going to tell you whatever you attach your radiometal or radiohalogen or whatever to, it's going to the place that tag is going to. So if you attach it to an antibody, it's going to the place where that antibody goes to. So the radioisotope itself doesn't really do much unless you attach it to something that's going to take it where it needs to go. But there's another area where you can leverage radioisotopes that emit either by alpha or by beta decay. And these alpha particles or beta particles have therapeutic properties in the way that alpha or beta particle travels. So positrons travel really, really fast. They're going to usually go pretty far in the body before they annihilate. And once they annihilate, they're not really doing much. But alpha particles particularly are really heavy. They're big particles and they're not going to travel far. But whenever they do annihilate, or we'll say annihilate, they deposit a lot of energy. And in doing so, when they deposit this large amount of energy, they cause damage to the cell. We can say to the DNA of the cell. And so if you deposit this alpha particle on a cancerous cell, it's likely going to kill it.
Oh, cool.
So,
okay.
Yeah. So we can use this for therapy. And so there are isotopes on this region of the chart of the nuclides or periodic table that have radioisotopes that have PET properties and radioisotopes that have either alpha or beta properties. And so usually theranostics, we like it if there's an isotope of an element that has both, right? Because if we're considering something like, nothing's coming to mind right now. Oh, terbium. If we're considering terbium isotopes, there are isotopes of terbium that have PET nuclear properties, and there are also isotopes of terbium that have, now I don't remember. It's either alpha or beta. I believe it's beta. And so if you develop a radiopharmaceutical that's using terbium, the chemistry is going to be the same because it's the same isotope essentially. It just is decaying differently. There are some radiopharmaceuticals or therapies, theranostics, I'll say, that use one element, let's say scandium, that has PET characteristics, but the therapeutic isotope is something totally different. Like lutetium-177 is a beta emitter, and it's routinely used for therapeutic pharmaceuticals. But the chemistry is really different. And so usually the therapeutic isotopes you can't image because they don't have PET nuclear characteristics. So you kind of have to trust that it's doing the same thing in the body as the diagnostic agent, right? And so there's no real solid way to confirm it. But if it's the same element and the chemistry is the same, there's a much less chance that it's going to do something different in the body. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, that sounds really good.
So, and so actinides and lanthanides have this broad range of availability of isotopes or elements that have isotopes with both diagnostic and therapeutic properties together. Additionally, actinides and lanthanides are important for many other areas of science, which are not my predominant areas of study, but they pose a problem in spent fuel storage. And so a lot of nuclear fuel waste has both actinide and lanthanides in it, but they have very different, the actinides and the lanthanides from each other, very different properties. And so if you're able to separate them, you're able to store the fuel more effectively.
Oh, okay. So like a jumble of radioactive nonsense, and
Yes.
it all has to be basically handled, stored differently,
Yes.
whatever. So
Yeah.
separating them just makes that easier.
Yes.
Gotcha.
But separation of actinides and lanthanides from each other is difficult because chemically they're very similar, right? And so it's tricky to accomplish separation methods that are elegant enough to actually separate these isotopes or these elements from each other, because the chemistry is what we're using to separate them from each other. It's not a nuclear thing, and it's just tricky because chemically they're similar.
Gotcha.
And then
Can I ask a follow-up question, Doc?
Yeah.
Okay. And I am ignorant with this question, so please laugh if it's the stupidest question. Okay. So these therapeutic lanthanides and actinides that impart that energy to the tumor, is that like the chemotherapy drugs that people take? Like, is that how it gets into the body to do that? Like, how does that? That's just where I'm confused.
So I'm not going to laugh because there is no such thing as a dumb or silly question, but okay. I don't know. I will admit I don't know too much about chemotherapy. I know chemotherapy is basically just a drug.
Okay, all right. I was wondering if these radioactive things were mixed in with that.
No,
but no. Okay,
usually not. Yeah, gotcha. Usually we have we'll have if it's just diagnostic, we can sometimes attach it to just like a small molecule or maybe a nanoparticle that's going to and we can attach it to something like a ligand that we know will bind to a specific receptor on the cell. So my dissertation research was focused on imaging of prostate cancer to better diagnose it. And we know that prostate cancer overexpresses the PSMA, prostate-specific membrane antigen receptor, relative to healthy tissue. So healthy tissue still does express it, especially in the salivary glands, but the tumors will overexpress it. So if we have this ligand, which we do have, that we know binds to PSMA, we can modify this ligand maybe by attaching a chelator and radio labeling that chelator to take the radiometal to this receptor, bind to it, and then we can image it. And so therapeutic version of this would be to take something like actinium-225 that decays by alpha emission, and we'll attach it to the same thing. It'll take it to this receptor, and then when actinium-225 decays and we have this alpha particle, once it reaches where it's going, which is not very far, then it's going to emit all of its energy, which is a lot of energy for this subatomic particle, and it's going to cause enough damage on the cell to kill it. And so that's how radiotherapeutics work, which is also different than I think what radiation oncologists, and I may be wrong, focus on is more like proton therapy, which is like external beam therapy. They're trying to irradiate the tumor from outside the body. And then chemotherapies, I think, are usually just really toxic drugs. And
yeah, it's rough for people that go through it, for sure.
Yeah. And so I think chemotherapy has a hard time distinguishing between healthy cells and cancer cells.
Just gets rid of everything and hopefully takes the cancer along with it.
Yeah. But people still survive, so it's not toxic enough to kill someone, I don't think. But I would take what I'm saying with a grain of salt in regards to chemotherapy. That's not medical advice.
But it's still good to know that what you're talking about is most likely not part of chemotherapy. That's good.
No,
That was my question. And
I think sometimes people can have radiotherapy with chemotherapy, and they'll be two different things. Gotcha. And so I think if you have and you can be imaged like with F18 FDG PET imaging to diagnose you. And then if you have maybe a type of cancer that we haven't developed a radiotherapeutic for, you'll get the PET scan to see what your cancer looks like, and then you'll get chemotherapy to treat it. And then the cool thing about PET is you can monitor response to therapy. So you can have a base scan to see what you're coming in with. You'll get a couple rounds of chemo, and then you come in for a second PET scan, and you can see, have you responded to therapy or not? And if you haven't, then they can change your therapy and try again, try something different.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Ivis, thanks for breaking that down for us. I so appreciate that.
Yeah, of course. I hope I didn't make it too convoluted or say something wrong.
It's so complicated, right? Like it's not like oh yeah, we just take a picture. No, it's like way more than that. Doc, are you okay if we move on to the next couple questions just for time?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Well, this has been fascinating. And for our listeners that love a little bit of chemistry, I'm sure they're just on the edge of their seats listening. So thanks for that. We have some standard questions on the podcast, and one of them is the pet story. Yeah. We ask our guests to share a pet story from their life. Do you have one for us we could hear?
Well, I guess instead of a story, I'll talk to you about my amazing dog. And every dog is amazing, but I think I have a special one. His name is Elmer. He is a 1-year-old black lab, and he is my entire world. He is so smart. Sometimes I think he's too smart. He knows things that I haven't even taught him as a command. It's amazing.
What a good boy.
Yeah.
So what's a couple things he can do, like beyond sit and come and stay?
Well, yeah, beyond sit and come, which he's great at, and he knows. So if I say, "Where's your toy? Go get it," he'll go to his toy basket, stick his head in there, and pick a toy that he wants and brings
Oh,
it to me. Or he's a lab, of course, and he comes from a very long line of field labs. Um, and he is excellent at retrieving. I mean, we've not trained him to be a hunter or anything like that, but he has a sixth sense when it comes to that ball. Um, but when he was really little, he was too excited, and so he would lose it. And living in New Mexico, the ground is all sandy, and the cacti all look the same, and there's no color variation. So he would lose his ball, and I could not see it because at this point it was covered in slobber and sand. So I just started talking to him, and I would say, and he was like maybe 4 months old, and I
oh.
would say, "Where's your ball? Go get it." And he'd kind of look at me like, "What are you saying?" And then I'd say, "I don't have another ball. If you don't find it, we can't keep playing." And he would start searching for it. And he still does it to this day. So it's amazing how he does it. He will kind of start running in a circle, in a wide open circle, and then he'll start making smaller circles until he finds it.
Oh, that's so cool. That's
Yeah.
that's scent detection. He's smelling the ball.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he's getting the wind into his nose.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
that's brilliant.
That is so cool. Yeah, I didn't know that.
Labs are so gregarious, aren't they? Like they're
No,
just
yeah.
so happy. Oh my goodness, they're like
He's
golden
so
retrievers.
sweet.
Like labs and retrievers are so close together. Like
Oh, yeah.
they're just golden retrievers are just they just shed way more.
Well, and something I learned, I think he's very observant and he'll listen. The
Mm.
other day, he was sitting on the bed and he was looking in the mirror, and I was pointing in the mirror to see if he could see himself. And I said, "Who is it?" And instead of looking in the mirror, he kind of sat up and like pointed his ears, and he ran to the front door. And I was like, first of all, we've never had guests. We've never had anyone knock on the door. So I don't know how he knew if I
Oh,
said, "Who
weird.
is it?" It's like he thought I was saying someone was there. And
Hmm.
he went out and looked.
That's wild.
Yeah.
Maybe he saw it on like a Netflix show you were watching. Who knows?
Oh yeah, he loves watching TV.
That's adorable. Well, thanks for telling us about your lab.
Yeah, my child.
Elmer?
Elmer, yeah.
Elmer, I love it. That's great. The other question we have for our guests, which is standard, but it's a lot of fun, is the super fact. The super fact is something that our guest knows, and when they tell people, it kind of blows their mind away. And again, I always say this so many times, guests usually blow me away with what their normal part of the interview is. But I was wondering if you have a super fact for us.
The funniest super fact that I have, that I think maybe it's not a super fact, but I think a lot of people don't think about it, is whenever you smell something, you're actually like inhaling particles. So if you go to the bathroom and it smells a lot like poop, you're kind of inhaling poop particles.
Gross.
I don't know. Maybe we can cut that part out, but that's like the funniest super fact that I have.
We can keep it if you want. It's up to you.
I don't know. Maybe we can keep it. I'm actually really obsessed with analyzing Elmer's poops, so it's fitting that that would be my super fact.
Well, it's a way you keep track of the health of your dogs, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Dog parents and parents with toddlers, they talk about poop all the time. It's like part of the conversation. Yep.
Yeah.
That's great. So we're nearing the end of our interview, and the last section is a fun one. We get to know our guests a little bit more outside of what they do. It's called the important to you section, important to you section with the pun. Guests talk about hobbies or causes, things they're really passionate about. And we're going to go back to your dog, and it's about food.
Yes.
What's going on there?
Yeah. So Elmer, when we got him as a tiny little puppy, he had what we called Operation Poop Storm.
Oh, no. Like just
had-
bad diarrhea?
Yes.
Oh,
Horrible.
yes. Oh,
And
no.
Yeah. And we would take him to the vet, and sometimes they would say he had Giardia or he had other parasitic infections, and they'd treat him for it, and it would get better, and then it would come back. And so I was taking poop samples to the vet. I'm not kidding, every month.
Yeah.
For the first year of his life. And when we moved to New Mexico, we started going to a different vet, and she said, well, he's testing negative. He's been testing negative for, 3 months now. Let's change his diet. So we changed his food. We did it the correct way. I know a lot of people say, oh, you didn't change his food the right way. No, I followed the vet. We changed it the right way. And I'm not kidding. We went through like 6 different brands of food. We even went to the very expensive brand, the high fiber prescription brand that is for dogs with really sensitive tummies. And that didn't help either. But I did notice that every time I gave him a bland diet, so just boiled chicken and rice, he had normal poops.
Yep.
And so I was like, I wonder if there's something in his food that he's allergic to. And at this point, we had tried all the flavors: chicken, salmon, beef, all those things.
But yeah, we've been there with Bunsen. Yep.
Oh, yeah. And so I was like, well, I'm already making him boiled chicken and rice. I'm just going to try making his food, like actual food. And so I did some research. I went on AKC. I started reading other people's stories on them making their dogs food. I read the ingredients on the back of his kibble bag. And I started informing myself. And I found a couple different spreadsheets online on how to make his food. And so I started to do that. And so, basically for him, so he is 1 year old. He's very, very active. We spend 2 to 3 hours exercising him every day. So we would call him very athletic. And he's about 70 pounds. So to make his food, we considered all of this. We calculated how many calories he expends, how many he needs for his age and weight. And, I started designing his food. And so now his food consists of chicken, ground turkey, several different kinds of vegetables, and brown rice. He has had flawless poops since I changed.
Yay, but that's good.
Yeah, since I changed his food. So now once a week, I make him about, I think it's something like 30 pounds of food. And that's enough for 2 meals a day for 5 to 6 days, depending if I want to give him a little extra per meal. Because and the other thing is, he did not want to eat. Whenever I would give him kibble, he would go, it sounds abusive, but he would go like a day or 2 without eating. He just would not want it. And now this food, of course, he loves it.
Yeah.
So
do you make it into patties, or is it like, how do you store it?
Yeah. So it depends. So when we moved, we drove from New Mexico to Tennessee. So I packaged in Ziploc bags, individual portions, like for his breakfast and his dinner, so that we could freeze it in the car, and have it that way. And so sometimes I do that if I, for whatever reason, need to be able to freeze meals and then just be able to take out one portion at a time. Other times I'll put it in one big container. And then when it comes to mealtime, I'll weigh out how much he needs for that meal. And then I also supplement with omega oils, and I'll give him eggs and cottage cheese. He doesn't like yogurt, so I have to give him, yeah. So I have to.
He's
give
a
him
lab that doesn't like food.
Yes.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah, and he won't eat carrots or celery. He won't eat anything that I just give him. He has to ask for it. It's
I
like
love that.
Yeah, it's like if I just give him something, he thinks it's medicine or it's bad.
What a guy.
Yeah, so what it looks like so what I do is I take a big pot and I'll boil all of the meat products, and I also add organ meat. So I buy either chicken or turkey, hearts, livers, and gizzards. And sometimes I buy beef kidney, beef tongue, beef tripe, or beef liver. And so I mix it up. But I think I've started to notice that beef, I don't know if it's because I give it to him infrequently and he's not used to it, or if he's sensitive to it, but beef kind of doesn't sit too well with him. So we stick with chicken and turkey for the most part. So I do add organ meat. So what it looks like, it's about 5 pounds of chicken, 3 pounds of turkey, and then 1 to 2 pounds of each organ meat. So I'll boil all of that until it's cooked. And then in the leftover juices, I'll add in the rice, let that cook, and then I add all the veggies and then mix it up really well. And then I'll either put it in one big container or I'll make individual portions of that. So it kind of looks, if you've ever seen like Spanish rice and beans all mixed together, it's kind of like that.
Oh, nice. Well, this is fascinating. We started our conversation talking about radioactive isotopes, and now we are jamming on the different diets that our dogs are on. So this is great.
Yeah, and it's still science.
It's still science. You're right. Ivis, we're at the end of our chat. Do you have a social media account people can follow? Like, if people wanted to connect with you, are you out and about on social media or not so much?
Yeah, so I am on Twitter, and they can find my Twitter handle is radiochemivis. That's radiochemivis. And then my lab has a new Instagram that you can follow, and it's Chapel Lab, CHAPLELAB.
Chapel Lab. Nice. Yeah. Okay. So we will make sure that those links are in the show notes to the interview. So folks.
Awesome. That's great. Thank you so much.
Okay. It is time for story time with me, Adam. If you don't know what story time is when we talk about stories that have happened within the past 1 or 2 weeks. Dad, do you have a story?
I do. And it's a big one. And maybe if Chris, you're there, you probably can chime in too. Chris and I took Bunsen and Beaker to an elementary school to deliver letters that my high school kids wrote back to kids who wrote to Santa. So it's a little convoluted, but in a nutshell, these little kids that are part of our feeder system. So they're like the elementary school kids that will one day come to my high school as high school kids. We do lots of little partner activities with them. They wrote letters to Santa, and a principal that I know, and I really respect this lady, she contacted me and she's like, would your high school kids answer these letters? So we just thought that would be the end of it. But last year, I think it was actually maybe Chris's idea to, why doesn't Bunsen deliver the letters back to the kids? And we did that last year. And this year we did even more letters, hundreds of them. And we brought Beaker as the elf, and it was a really rewarding morning. There's a lot of things that could have gone wrong. Like, for one, it has been so stupid cold that Bunsen and Beaker have been so cooped up, especially Beaker. So when we got to the school, Beaker was a little overstimulated and a little excited. And we went from classroom to classroom, and we told the kids that Santa answered their letters, and Bunsen, because he's so furry, went to the North Pole and got them and brought them back. And I pulled them out of his little backpack, and all the little kids were super excited. And new this year was the kids got to interact with Bunsen and Beaker. So that was really cute. I'm pretty sure Chris is going to talk more about that.
Yeah, so we did. We brought the dogs, and you couldn't have asked for a better morning. It was heartwarming. It was heartfelt. Everybody was excited. Adults and kids alike. Some of the adults were just like, "Whoof," with all the hustle and bustle and the stress of the season. When the dogs were in there, they just had a real calming effect. And the kids were excited.
Yeah, the kids were like so excited, but then they were so calm for the dogs.
Yeah. And Beaker was very excited to go into each room and have everybody look at her. Yeah, she was a good girl. Yeah. Bunsen, Jason is pretty sure that Bunsen ate something off the floor.
Yeah, he did. I saw him eat a little cracker off the floor.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
not the most dignified thing for Santa Paws to do is to eat a thing off the floor. It was really interesting, like, because Bunsen doesn't necessarily enjoy tons and tons of people in his face, and you had him to start with, and he was maybe, not 100% sure, but being glommed on by the kids.
Well, and there
And
wasn't
he
a
was
lot of
kind of like that
space.
last time.
There wasn't a lot of space by that one desk. Like
Yeah.
they had them in quads, and then
Yeah.
there was like a little alleyway, I guess, or a little, I don't know what you call it in the classroom, like a walkway, and it was
Yeah.
a little tight. And Bunsen
Yeah.
was like, it's a little tight
And-
here. I'm as big as a bus.
And then
So-
something just clicked with him. He's like, "Oh, we're here to see kids," and
Yeah.
and it's like something clicked in his head, and then he was so like, he wasn't like he was mean to the kids, but he was kind of not 100% going up to see them. Right? He would kind of like brush by them for the first like 25 seconds, and then something clicked in his brain, and he's like, "Oh, this is what we're doing," and then he was so happy to see the kids.
Yeah, and he does. He picks his favorites, and I think once he realized he was getting butt scratches, he was like, "Yeah, I'm for this. This is me now. I love this. If you could just pet me more, that would be fantastic."
Yeah. And then when Bunsen would be like, "Well, I'm kind of all done with all of these kids," Beaker would like come in for emotional mop up. She would be like, I don't get sick of this. So it was cute.
And she wore her little sweater, which was pretty cute.
Yeah.
Um,
Did you find it a little shocking that more kids wanted to pet Bunsen than Beaker? I thought I was a little surprised because Beaker is smaller, and maybe not as intimidating, but all of the kids wanted to touch Bunsen.
Bunsen is Santa Paws.
I guess.
Like everybody loves Santa Claus. Mrs. Claus is just kind of the sidekick, kind of like us, where you're the face of the account, and I do all the behind the scenes stuff, a lot of that, and no guts, no glory, right?
I love that there's one boy who was terrified of dogs, and he pet Bunsen. He got worked up the courage to pet Bunsen. He started off by petting Bunsen's backpack. He didn't want to touch. He was so scared. He didn't want to touch Bunsen's fur. So he kind of scratched him on his backpack. And there's Bunsen. And to Bunsen's credit, he knows when kids are scared, and he just like calms down and he moves his butt into them. So his face maybe right isn't in their face. And then what did you tell the kid that was really cute?
Oh yeah. I said, you were so brave and I am proud of you.
Yeah. So that's my story.
And I guess that's my story too. I've just been continuing with Advent with the dogs and with Ginger, and she's so funny. Sometimes she likes a toy and sometimes she doesn't. I really thought she would like the green and red mouse. No, that one was not popular. So I actually don't know what ones that she's really going to like. It's a crapshoot every day.
So I have a story, and my story is not as interesting, but it's still a story, and it's a short story. It's a story about the dogs and how cold it is outside. So if you guys don't know, we live in very, very cold. It gets very cold in some parts of Canada, and where we live, it gets pretty cold. So I got home and the sun was already down, and that's already a bad sign. If the sun is down, it is always going to be so cold. Except for in the summer. In the summer, it's so hot, so it's really confusing. But I go outside, and I'm like, oh, this is fine. And I'm in Dad's survival suit, which is rated for like -40.
It's rated for -60, actually.
-60.
Yeah, it's rated for the Arctic.
It is currently, at this very hour, it is -28. But it feels like -39 because of the wind. So the wind
makes
makes
it worse. 2 days ago, Adam. It was worse. It was way
so much
colder.
worse. It was like it felt like it was -45.
Yeah.
So people say you've never experienced rain until you've experienced a wet rain or a dry wet or something like that. You've never experienced cold until you've experienced a windy cold. So it makes it feel so much colder than it actually is. I went outside. I was like, oh, it was fine. I was walking them around. They did their business. And then I took them for a little jaunt because they hadn't walked and they need to walk every day, basically. I started walking. And once I got out of the protection of like the shed, we have a shed, the wind hit me and it was so cold. I had my glasses on and my glasses were burning my face because of how cold it was. Like I could feel on my nose just something burning because it was so cold. And then the dogs wanted to go back inside. So
they were
I was
done.
pretty
Even
happy
Bunsen's
with that.
done.
When Bunsen is done, we're done. He doesn't want to. If he wants to go back inside, he goes back inside. There's no really stopping him from going back inside. But yeah, that's my story about it being so cold here during the winter always, but also being so hot during the summer. It makes no sense. Yeah, and I think that's story time. Thank you so much for listening to my section of the podcast today, and thank you so much for listening to this podcast episode. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.
That is a wrap for this year of the Science Podcast. Special thanks to everybody who listened and came back week after week to listen to our show. Special thanks also to Dr. Ivis Gore, who talked to us about radiochemistry. So very cool. Chris, let's give a shout out to our top tier PodPack members.
Elizabeth Bourgeois, Peggy McKeel, Mary LaMagna Ryder, Helen Chin, Holly Burge, Sandy Breimer, Brenda Clark, Andrew Lynn, Marianne McNally, Karen Beth St. George, Catherine Jordan, Tracy Domingue, Diane Allen, Julie Smith, Terry Adam, Shelley Smith, Jennifer Smathers, Laura Stephenson, Tracy Leanbaugh, Courtney Proven, Fun Lisa, Ben Rathert, Jody Ogren, Brianne Haas, Bianca Hyde, Debbie Anderson, Anne Uchida, Donna Craig, Amy C., Susan Wagner, Kathy Zerker, and Liz Button.
For science, empathy, and cuteness.